Well, President Donald Trump appears to be in an escalating war with two popular libertarians that at least once were an important part of the MAGA coalition, having come around to the cause in the last decade at various points. So first, Senator Rand Paul, who's of course been on this show, and then Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky. I have a couple of clips to go through here because the fight is getting brutal as it looks like the United States is heading closer and closer to war with Venezuela as Donald Trump is trying to end a government shutdown. At least on favorable terms for Republicans. So, first, make sure to subscribe on YouTube. Thanks for getting us over the 100,000 mark. We appreciate it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of Undercurrents. We appreciate it. Now, take a look at this clip of Senator Rand Paul on Meet the Press Sunday. Donald Trump also posted on Truth Social about Rand Paul on Sunday. He's known to pay very close attention to television shows. We're going to do a Lindsey Graham clip right after this one. But first, here's Rand Paul talking about Venezuela on NBC News Sunday.
Venezuela. Obviously, you've been very focused on this. President Trump has authorized military strikes against suspected drug boats in the Caribbean. As you know, so far, more than 20 people, Senator, have been killed in 6 different strikes. Do you believe that these strikes against these suspected drug boats are legal?
No, they go against all of our tradition. You know, when you kill someone, you should know if you're not at war, not in a declared war, you really need to know someone's name, at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all of these people have been blown up without us knowing their name, without any evidence of a crime. And for decades, if not centuries, when you stop people at sea in international waters or in your own waters, you announce that you're going to board the ship and you're looking for contraband, smuggling, or drugs. This happens every day off of Miami, but we know from Coast Guard statistics that about 25% of the time the Coast Guard boards a ship, there are no drugs.
Interrupting quickly here to introduce you to today's sponsor. Have you been trying to take a healthier, more mindful approach to eating? So important to do. Hypnotio is a self-hypnotherapy app that supports sustainable weight loss by targeting the subconscious causes of unhealthy eating habits. Through guided hypnotherapy sessions, it helps users overcome emotional eating, reduce stress, and build a healthier relationship with food, creating lasting behavioral change beyond traditional diet and exercise methods. So easy to fit into your schedule too. You just listen to a short session wherever you have time, whenever you have time. It's simple, relaxing, and actually helps to make better choices without overthinking every meal. So it's all science-backed, focused on long-term results, and way more sustainable than most quick fix programs out there. Plus, it works on any device, which is super convenient. So if you're ready to build healthier habits the easy way, check out the link in my description and pinned comment. Use my code to get 15% off your first subscription with Hypnosio. Okay, so Trump posted on Sunday to say what happened. He says basically whatever happened to Senator Rand Paul, he was never great, but he went really bad. I got him elected twice in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky, but he just never votes positively for the Republican Party. He's a nasty little guy, much like Congressman Thomas Massie, aka Rand Paul Jr., also of Kentucky, which I won 3 times in massive landslides, a sick wacko who refuses to vote for our great Republican Party, MAGA, or America First. It's really weird. Okay. So Lindsey Graham, meanwhile, was on with Sean Hannity on Monday night. And on Monday night, Lindsey Graham said about Trump's Venezuela policy, essentially, the president is interested in regime change. That phrase in particular, or that concept in particular, is going to set off all of the alarm bells with libertarians like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. Let's take a listen.
He's a narco-terrorist, drug dealer, illegitimate president, and Trump is going to set the conditions to take him down.
So Senator Rand Paul's father, Ron Paul, who was, of course, a longtime libertarian member of the House of Representatives, weighed in and said on social media, in a hysterical rant over the weekend, President Trump has blasted Thomas Massie and Senator Paul as a couple of wackos who refuse to vote for the Republican Party. Meanwhile, President Trump has just announced that his first in-person fundraiser of the election cycle will be for ... Lindsey Graham. Okay. That's true. Actually, this is a Politico report. Headline, Trump's first in-person fundraiser of the 2026 cycle will be for Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham at this point, of course, has a much stronger claim to speaking about what the Trump doctrine is than Rand Paul or Thomas Massie. But all that said, there's probably an argument Rand Paul and Thomas Massie are closer to the average Republican voter on the question of Venezuela than Lindsey Graham and Trump himself. We don't know that yet because this is only starting to play out. The reason, though, many people were attracted to the Trump candidacy when Rand Paul was running against Trump, when Lindsey Graham was running against Trump in 2015 and 2016, and in very bitter and nasty fights, actually, it was because there was widespread exasperation among Republicans, Republican-leaning voters, and then in the general election, independents, with adventurism, especially in the Middle East. And so let me read from a new report on what's happening with Venezuela. This is from Axios, and it's, I think, maybe surprising, if you haven't been following the story closely, which I don't blame anybody for not following closely, it may be surprising to learn, quote, the U.S. military has killed at least 32 people in 7 strikes off the coast of Venezuela without telling Congress or the American people who was killed or on what evidence. Rand Paul, of course, is trying to push for that information to get to Congress. This is what he was talking to Kristen Welker about, and it is accurate. The administration is basically saying, trust us. These guys were narco-terrorists. We know they're narco-terrorists, and they were heading towards the United States. We've heard a couple of times people saying, well, maybe they were heading to another country, another of our allies, and they were going to poison those people with drugs. You could write an entire book on the first 10 months of Donald Trump's second-term Venezuela policy, because the question of fentanyl versus cocaine is obviously relevant. The question of whether Nicolas Maduro controls either Tren de Aragua or Cartel de los Soles as an indictment in the Southern District of New York, I think actually fairly convincingly posited. But then on top of that, is that justification enough to make these strikes? And then to make these strikes without providing the evidence to Congress, does any of the legal justification add up? I mean, one of the points Rand Paul has made for many years, Thomas Massie has made for many years, actually is that the executive does have too broad war powers. That's going back decades, a concern of people in the United States, that presidential war powers are too broad and have been especially broad in the post-World War II era. And some of it has been walked back, but that very point might undermine the case that Rand Paul and Thomas Massie are making. It's like, on paper, should Donald Trump be providing these legal justifications? Do they have these legal justifications? They're saying, trust us. But is there a presidential war power? We've seen them flirt with the idea of using the AUMF, the authorized use of military force that was passed after 9/11, which is quite a stretch. But is there something on the books? I think if there were something really easy, we would hear the Trump administration very clearly citing it. But for now, what Rand Paul is saying is fairly, again, like on paper, is fairly obvious. And I think most American people would say this is exactly what we think an administration should do when it comes to, I mean, we're not talking about the Sinaloa cartel, for example, which has very obviously been involved and is a quasi-state actor, literally controls swaths of territory in Mexico, has been involved in pumping fentanyl into the United States intentionally and illegally for years. We're talking about Venezuela. And this is a case based on the idea that Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is actively controlling the narco trafficking. And again, I think the indictment of Maduro had some pretty convincing evidence with his connection to Cartel de los Soles. But do we know that these boats have that connection? Does the government know? We have actually no information because they're not sharing it. And my perspective, you can probably tell, is that's not right. And I want to just get into a little bit of why it's not right, based on more from this Axios story, which the headline is ominous. Trump's Venezuela operation expands in the dark. So the big picture, according to Axios, the U.S. is 8 weeks into a military campaign in the Caribbean Sea with the twin aims of stopping drugs and potentially toppling Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. Well, that potentially, we heard from Lindsey Graham, is a lot more serious than others may realize. This is a senior administration official talking to Axios. Quote, officially, our position is we're there to stop narco-terrorists. We're going to blow up their boats, and we're going to be patient about it. No one is in any rush. There's a quote towards the bottom of this article that's ominous as well. This is a source quoted by Axios. It's hard to see sending all these assets over there and then just retreating after blowing up some drug boats. Glenn Greenwald posted on Sunday, it speaks volumes that two of the members of Congress whom Trump is targeting, Tom Massie and Rand Paul, are two of the most anti-interventionist, anti-censorship, and anti-swamp politicians in all of D.C. He said in response to Rand Paul's interview on Meet the Press, this is one reason Trump is now targeting him. Rand Paul is one of the few people who vehemently objected to Obama's policy of killing whoever he wanted by randomly labeling them terrorists and objects to Trump's doing so on the same ground. That's right. Drones, the Obama-era drone strikes, which a lot of conservatives have come out retroactively and criticized Obama for, some of the same principles apply right here. And the reason those were rightfully criticized as being dangerous is exactly what that last quote I read from an unnamed source to Axios, quote, it's hard to see sending all these assets over there and then just retreating after blowing up some drug boats. Why is that important? Well, you have Lindsey Graham saying basically that Trump has a plan to oust Maduro. There's a $50 million bounty on his head that was put there by the State Department. You have a military buildup in the region. You have uses of force that the administration is being fairly cagey about. That's all adding up to what sure looks like a kinetic conflict with Venezuela, like on Venezuelan land, in the goal of regime change. What happens after Maduro? People have, Marina Corina Machado just won the Nobel Peace Prize and is a somewhat non-controversial figure in these kinds of global elite circles. And we could have a separate conversation about her and about, the positives and the negatives. Listen, I'm a conservative. I think Venezuela is a totalitarian hellhole right now, and the Venezuelan people would be better off with more lowercase d democracy. But we have how many years now? Almost 100 years of examples. Just to even go on with this Axios story, quote, last week, Trump confirmed he'd authorized CIA covert operations on Venezuelan soil. Overhead, the U.S. conducted a bomber attack demonstration with B-52s, which you probably remember. So, CIA covert operations on Venezuelan soil. Sounds like reheated Cold War follies, obviously, because we've seen how many operations like that, particularly in the Caribbean, over, decades at this point, where you create a power vacuum. There's lots of bloodshed. Then what comes after, and not a lot of transparency, by the way, and then what comes after the bloodshed is a power vacuum that is filled in ways even worse, that can be even worse for the people of that country, and even worse for U.S. interests, So these can also drag you into deeper and deeper military conflicts. I think that the Trump administration probably is particularly looking at Panama right now as an example of what can be done. What happened to Manuel Noriega during the H.W. Bush administration. And maybe they see that as a positive example. I'm assuming that's probably the case right here. But for every Panama, there's a Guatemala. For every Panama, there's different examples of regime change operations, particularly starting with the CIA, that involve military buildups that can either drag the U.S. into a longer protracted conflict or produce results that are not even good for the people of that country or not even ultimately good for U.S. interests. There's still a lot of debate to this day about CIA operations in Afghanistan during the Reagan administration and all kinds of different places around the world. And for a lot of people, including Massie and Rand Paul, who were convinced at different points to attach themselves to the MAGA movement, Trump stood against those follies. He stood against Cold War adventurism. And I don't think they were naive to believe that Donald Trump was a libertarian. In fact, Thomas Massie once told me and my colleagues at the Washington Examiner back in like 2017 or 18, when he was going around Kentucky campaigning with Rand Paul and Ron Paul for Rand Paul back in the Tea Party years, he said, I thought people were really excited about libertarian ideas and small government, but it turns out they were just looking for the craziest son of a bitch in the race. That's what Trump taught Thomas Massie, he said. But Trump really did bitterly criticize the many errors of American foreign policy during and after the Cold War. And so he was a symbol of that for many, many people around the Republican Party, around the conservative movement, as, for example, the CIA, the FBI, and the Pentagon began affiliating themselves more and more with Democrats. Republicans started to reconsider decades of foreign policy because of the global war on terror after 9/11, and because they were watching these intelligence agencies and the Pentagon itself start to align more and more with the left, believe it or not. Or with the Democratic Party to the extent it represented the left. And so there is going to be disagreement within the White House, within this administration, and within the MAGA coalition about conflict in Venezuela as we inch closer and closer to something potentially very explosive. But again, already 32 people have been killed in 7 strikes off the coast of Venezuela. So And with very little justification, and I'll add, to sort of challenge myself, steelman myself right here, without much pushback from anyone other than Rand Paul. The Trump coalition here in Washington, D.C., with the exception of Rand and Thomas Massie, who have been on the outs of the president for a long time now, the MAGA coalition is just fine. There isn't a ton of infighting over Venezuela. There's skepticism, for sure. But people trust Donald Trump and the administration. That's probably not surprising. But people sort of trust the Trump foreign policy because they don't trust the other foreign policies. And that gives Trump the benefit of the doubt with his own supporters when even his foreign policy resembles the foreign policy they've come to oppose. So it's a very interesting case study. I find it to be a very troubling conflict. Now, it's possible critics are proven wrong over the course of this conflict, and the Trump administration learns the lessons of the last 100 years, applies things differently. The lack of transparency, the lack of justifying these attacks suggests to me that won't be the case. It's an early indicator that won't be the case, that we're not looking at a liberated, healthier Venezuela post-Maduro regime change. But this is all very unpredictable. It's a very fragile situation right now, obviously, and it could escalate any day. Obviously, the administration was conveying patience to Axios on background, but this could escalate any day. There are plenty of examples of how it goes wrong, partially because these situations are so unpredictable. Iran being a very good example of that. I'm talking about way back, Iran being a good example of that. But in the long term, we've just seen so many failures. Trump is partially elected in response to those failures. And that's what makes, I think, the case of Venezuela a really, really important case study going forward. And not just an important case study, important, of course, in substance, too. But this could, this could escalate for Trump if American troops end up getting harmed. That's what can create conflict escalation, and that could politically be a problem for him. When you have Lindsey Graham out there just saying openly that the president's trying to do regime change, Trump seems to be owning it so far. So we'll see politically and in substance if this is different from what came before it. An interesting story to follow nonetheless. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate it. As a reminder, undercurrents.tv is where you can go for the full premium experience of the show. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back here with more soon.